Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the kitchen. Welcome back to another episode of Stuff in Our Cupboard. I have to be very careful. It is March 22nd, 2020 when I'm filming this. I have to be very careful about the words I use because YouTube is both demonetizing videos and outright removing them from the platform if you say the wrong words. So I'm going to be very careful to sort of dance around what's happening. There's a thing happening in the world, and a lot of people are stuck at home. And Julie and I are stuck at home. And so we're eating stuff out of our cupboard, and we're making meals with stuff that we're finding and trying to put stuff together. So we did a deep dive into our freezer and found this piece of flank steak. Now, normally when I put stuff in the freezer for long-term storage, buy a bunch of stuff ahead because it's on sale, I will put it into freezer bags and then vacuum seal them. We've got a pretty good vacuum seal set up, and I put them in, and it stays in the freezer for a long time, and meat doesn't freezer burn. Eventually it does. Eventually all meat freezer burns, but it doesn't freezer burn too badly, it keeps for much longer. For some reason, this was just in saran wrap. And there's two of them down there. So I pulled out the first one, and I'm going to see what I can do with it. And the first thing I thought was, let's make a brajol. We've got a great brajol recipe on the website. And then I realized we don't have all of the ingredients to make it. So I'm going to do sort of a fast and dirty version. I'm going to cut this up and see if I can clean off most of the freezer burn. And we're just going to use what we have and make a sauce and put it over the fresh pasta that we made. So check out that video too. Okay, so I've got a pot, a little bit of olive oil. It's getting hot, and into that I'm going to put an onion and a couple of ribs of celery. And we just want to get those softening. Next up, I want to trim off the worst of the freezer burn from this steak. And around the edges, it is pretty tough. I mean, it's a tough piece of meat to begin with, and you don't need sort of that added toughness of the freezer burn. As well, it doesn't taste great. So let's get as much off as we can. Now, normally, I would brown this meat before I added anything else to start to build up some flavors. I don't want to brown it this time. Because of how it is, it's freezer burnt, I don't want to make that toughness tougher. So I'm just going to slice it really thin and cook it slowly. We're just going to braise it, and we're going to braise it with a couple of ingredients that are going to bring in the flavors that will be missing by not browning the meat. So trim a little bit more of this off, and then we'll slice it real thin. It trimmed up nicely. We didn't lose too much from the steak, and when I sliced it really thin. I sliced it across the grain because that keeps it from being tough later. I'm going to wash my hands, and then we'll move on to the next step. The vegetables have sweated out nicely, so let's add in the beef. We'll just stir that in. I'm working with a smaller palette of ingredients, which I'm sure you are too. I don't have any fresh herbs, and it's March, the end of March. Our herb garden hasn't come up. It's going to be at least another month before we even start to see some of those herbs in our garden, although it is time to plant your tomatoes. If you live sort of in Canada where we do, we're planting our tomatoes probably tomorrow inside so that the end of May, when we can actually plant outside and the last frost has gone by, we can get those tomatoes in the ground because we're going to need them this summer. So I've got some oregano flakes, dried oregano. I'll put some of that in. A little bit of basil. I've got some dried basil. I'm going to put some of that in. And, this is cooking. You don't really need to measure it. Just kind of guess. After a while, you'll know how much you're going to put in anyway. We'll stir that in. A little bit of salt and some black pepper. Okay. Now, can of tomatoes. This is pretty much all I have left, so we'll see how this works out. Into the pot. I wasn't sure how these tomatoes were going to come out of the can. I knew that they were whole tomatoes packed in the can. Sometimes when you pour them out, they're very watery. These ones seem to be a lot thicker, the sauce that was in there. So I'm gonna have to add more liquid. I'm just gonna have to go with it and see what I've got for other liquids. I am gonna add some wine, so I might as well put that in now. I've got some red wine. Jules and I have a fairly well-stocked wine fridge, but it won't last forever. So we'll see how that goes. I'll put that in, and so if you need to add, you could add water, you could add chicken stock, you could add beef stock, vegetable stock, any sort of liquid that you have on hand you could put in here. Doesn't have to be wine, although wine will help release some of the other flavors. But we're going to address that in a moment with a hot pepper. I don't have any hot pepper flakes, so I thought I'm just going to take one of the pickled hot peppers that we had from last summer. They're packed in vinegar, these ones in particular. And so I'm going to put that in whole. And what that's going to do is the pepper will add some flavor, some heat. The vinegar will add that bright acidity to actually brighten all of the other flavors and bring some of the other flavors out of what else is in there. Put that in. Because I didn't brown the meat, I'm going to add some Marmite. The Marmite will compensate for that lack of browning. It will also unlock a lot of other flavors. Marmite makes beef beefier. And in the place of Marmite, depending on where you live, Vegemite. If you live in England, Bovril comes in a bottle like this. That would work really well. You could also put Worcester sauce in. That is a great substitute as well. So we're going to stir that in. Next thing in is the rind from a piece of Parmesan that's been hanging out in our fridge for a little while. Kind of surprised that it hasn't grown moldy, but it hasn't. So I'm going to put that in, and that's going to bring an incredible flavor to this sauce. Now, you need to decide how thick or how thin do you want the sauce. I think I want my sauce a little bit thinner. I'm going to cook this in the oven. So I've got an oven preheated to like 280 degrees. I'm going to put a lid on this. I'm going to stick it in the oven, and it's going to go for probably 8 or 9 hours. I'm not even going to think about it. I don't have to stir it. I don't have to do anything. It's just going to simmer away in the oven, come together, and make, I hope, a really good sauce. So I'm going to add a little bit of broth. You should always have, I know that I say make your own broth, and I try to always make my own broth, but in a situation like this, having a couple of boxes of emergency broth in your cupboard is a really good idea. So I'm going to put some in, using it sparingly, because who knows when I'm going to get to the grocery store next. So into the oven, and 7-8 hours from now, I'll come back and I'll roll out the pasta and cut the noodles, and we'll finish off the sauce. But an hour before we wanted to eat, I took the pasta dough out of the fridge and started to roll it out on a very lightly floured countertop. Once it was rolled out to the thickness that I was looking for, I put a little bit of flour on top so that it wouldn't stick as I rolled it over onto itself. And then I just used a knife to cut fairly wide bands of pasta. Then I unrolled it, put a little bit of flour on it so it wouldn't stick, and then cut those in half to about the length that I wanted. Once I got the length I wanted, I put them into a pot of salted boiling water, and I only cooked them for about 1.5 to 2 minutes. Fresh pasta does not take long to cook.
Hello, Glenn. Hello,
Hey, Jules.
friends. I brought wine. How's your experiment?
The pasta
I didn't bring wine,
is
I brought glasses.
almost done. So it doesn't take long for pasta to cook, fresh pasta to cook. I'm going to say that's good. And the sauce smells really good. The steak has pretty much completely disintegrated. So if you cut it correctly, or if you cut it thin enough against the grain, it pretty much just falls apart. And so I took the cheese rind out. That's what it looks like at the end. It's a pretty much
It's gelatinous-y.
pretty gelatinous mass, and the sauce is nice and thick. And of course, you can make the sauce as thick or thin as you like. So on top of the pasta, and then we'll just toss it together with the sauce. You could cook enough pasta and put it in with the sauce, but I only cooked enough pasta for us tonight. Maybe just a little bit more sauce on top. Okay, so that looks pretty good.
All right.
Can I get any messier? So, just a little taste.
I'm sure. Oh, wine's good.
Is the wine good?
Wine's good.
We're getting down to the point where I think the only thing left in the wine fridge is good wine.
That's okay. I like
Yeah,
good wine.
I like good wine,
You
too.
know, if you need a reason to drink the good wine,
I think this is
this
it.
is it.
Okay, having difficulty serving.
Have you been drinking the wine?
I haven't yet been drinking the wine.
All right.
Now you can cut the pasta any shape you want.
That's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Just a basic Sunday red sauce. Nothing complicated. Don't overthink it.
It's probably a good save on that
Yeah,
rather
I was-
frozen piece of meat.
I was worried about that piece of meat. So, do a deep dive into your freezer if you're stuck at home. Find the stuff at
You
the
never
bottom.
know what you're going to find.
And pretty much anything that's freezer burnt, I think if you cut off the worst of the burnt dry bits and then do a slow, long braise,
Yeah.
something with a little bit more acidity, a little bit higher acidity, the flavor's going to be fine. And the texture of the meat is just all around pretty good. Yeah. So, thanks for stopping by. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you again soon.